Hello guys, today I'll be showing you how to create a spider rig in Houdini in KineFX with ikeychains to drive the leg position. Starting with the skeleton, binding the geometry, and then wrapping up the project as a digital asset. To start the skeleton off, it's best to work on the grid instead of trying to trace the skeleton from the geometry. Right click to show handle, mode create. If you try tracing it from the geometry, the handle retains weird angles, and then it gets pretty hard to do any corrections if the point is not aligned as you want. You can also select child compensate if you want to work on a point individually. When you work on a grid, you can see that each point is aligned to the world, and it's much easier then to make any changes or to adjust the point towards the geometry. Once you're done with the skeleton, and you need to preview the names and have the names on the fly, you can right click on this icon, click a plus sign, marker. When you type in name in the attribute, you'll have all the point names visible here. So it'll be much easier to work with. Then we have to bind all the legs to the center of gravity point. And this will be our main skeleton that we'll be moving from the center of gravity point along here. As a separate movement to control each leg individually and to get the ikeychain to work, we're going to have to separate the leg tips, add control geometry. We don't have to change the position of the control geometry, that's done automatically by this node. And then a rig pose node for each of the leg tips. We also need the midpoints to act as hinges for the ikeychains. Depending on where the midpoints are, the ikeychain will fold. If these middle points were towards the ground, then when I would move this point towards the center of the spider, the leg would bend inwards, downwards. But because they're pointing up, all the legs will bend upwards and the leg will fold onto itself like it's supposed to. We just merge these points together and unparent all of them. You can unparent any skeleton just by adding this star, which means everything parented to nothing, and it will just disconnect all the parents from each other. Now, in the ikeychain system, first set controls the first, middle, and end point. But you can still see here that there's quite a lot of movement that isn't being used through some of the angles, through this angle, and this angle specifically. So when we add the second ikeychain that works on the intermediate points, you can see that extra movement starts to happen. You can especially see it in the point between 2 and 3. There's quite a lot more movement. And when we add another ikeychain just to fill in that angle here, we can fully stretch the leg out. And all we have to do is just iterate that over each leg, and we can get a quite nicely working IK system that also works in reverse. If we move the COG point, you can see that the tips of the legs stay in place, but the body itself moves, and the IK system does the math to blend the movement in seamlessly. Just reset that. And reset the leg as well. Now once we've got our skeleton that we can pose, we also need the rest skeleton, which is our original one. And using this skeleton, we're going to bind the geometry to it using these 3 nodes. The default settings work good enough. And then we can use extra caution to paint in the weights. We can add this node here, we can use the posing skeleton, add that to the weights node. And we can pose the skeleton and see how it reacts to the deformation. We can actually use the bone deform to plug in the weights straight into the deformer. If we go back to paint weights, actually if we pose the skeleton first from the leg, let's say here for example, and go back here, you can see where the stretching is going on and we can make any changes accordingly, which is nice. So once we've painted the weights properly and we've got this bone deform node, we can select everything. Go to assets and select new digital asset from selection. Just check. Right, it's recording. And we can save to a certain place. Just save it to desktop and call it spider rigged. And press accept. Now, the first thing to do when we're working with rigging characters, we go to node and type in KineFX _ rig pose to see the control geometry outside of the node network and to see it here from this subnet. We also need to add the actual spider geometry to the digital asset as we're still referencing it from disk. Find the model, we can drag drop it in. Click add file. And click apply and accept. To reference the geometry from the digital asset, we go back into the subnet. We go to the file. Instead of hip, we type in opdef _, and question mark without the slash. And now the geometry is being referenced from the digital asset and we can give this to anyone on a different computer and they'll still have the geometry contained within. Let's go back. Let's see how the control geometry reacts. We can see that our spider rig is working fine. An important thing to note when working with two rig pose nodes and having the same points in each rig pose is it's important to lock the points that are the same here and here in at least one of them, as these points to the left, they correspond to the actual skeleton, whereas the points on the right change the destination of each leg, of the tip of the eye keychain. This is what we want to change and this is what we don't. So it's always important to lock it, so in case we don't select, there's no way to manipulate this value and no damage is going to happen to our skeleton in general. If you go back and select preview, if we want to see what's happening with the transformation from this view, we can go to type properties, right click, go to parameters, and go into our rig pose that controls the leg tips. Can change the value if we're using the right one, yes. We can just drag drop the translate value into the parameters tab, click apply. If we go back, we can see that the value here is on display. And you can do this with anything, you can do this with the center of gravity point as well. And if you want, you can create a separate tab by adding a folder and dropping that into here. If we add another folder, we can keep things more organized. Call this folder legs, and this one body. Ooh. Typed it in wrong, there we go. Now we've got separate tabs for each of the variables that we can control. It just keeps things a bit more clean. So there you have it, guys. Basically, with this setup, we've created a fully rigged spider, a fairly simple rig, but it works well. It's fairly easy to control. And I'll be providing this project in the description to this video. So if you want to work on it yourselves or make any improvements or use it for your project, feel free. And I was happy having you guys. I'll see you in the next tutorial.